Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Kensington Corner. I'm Jeff.
And I'm Tom. Today we have Stephen Bryla, who is the owner and operator with Go With The Float, which is a sensory deprivation tank company. Stephen, how you doing?
Doing good, guys. Thanks for having me on. Glad to be here.
No, we're excited. We're glad you were able to come on, man. So tell us like a little bit of the backstory, and then obviously shout out to Corey for hooking us up. So that was awesome.
Yeah, so Corey's the man. He's dating my cousin Elizabeth. They're out in San Diego. You guys are in Kansas, and I'm on the East Coast. So the full country connection.
There it is, the three-way tie, the Pacific Railroad.
So a little bit about the business. We actually just opened about 7 months ago, and the story goes, my first float was almost 11 years ago now, mid-state in Massachusetts in a place called Worcester. I went seeking it out based on the advice of Joe Rogan before he was, big with his podcast. Joe Rogan is like single-handedly responsible for the rise of the float industry.
Yeah.
I go to these float conferences, and he's just like a god there, because of now his outreach with the most popular podcast there is. But he was just blabbing about it on YouTube, like I said, 11, 15 years ago even. And so I was like, all right, let's do it. I looked around, nowhere near me. And so I went out to Worcester, and they're not, like I said, Central Mass, and they are not, it was not a full-blown float center. They were just doing massage, like energy healing, other types of things. And they had a spare room with a float tank. With no expectations, I took the dive, and it absolutely blew my mind. And the rest is history.
Now, the big question, number one question everyone asks is, did you hallucinate like your first time, or do you hallucinate when you actually are diving, or no?
No, I don't. And so that's I feel like there's this whole thing with floating where, no expectations and do not program was kind of the theory of the inventor, John Lilly. And unfortunately, I feel like that's what Joe does for a lot of people is, he has some far out experiences, mainly using edibles in there, and kind of builds people's expectations up to where if they're not like entering the fifth dimension with like dragons and goblins, that they're disappointed. For me though, what happened was it was really like it was like an out of body experience. This was before I knew anything about like meditation or mindfulness. And it's funny, I remember coming back home and telling my family, trying to explain what happened. And what I was saying, it was like, it's not that I was floating through space, it's that I was space. I was like everything's energy. It was like something that's kind of comparable of like explaining some sort of psychedelic trip, but I was completely sober going in there. And I like left my body is pretty much what happened.
Well, that's kind of the cool thing about like sensory deprivation, right? Because I know like and I honestly don't meditate enough personally, but it's something that, I have, I have worked with and whatnot, but, trying to disconnect yourself from kind of those, those other sensory experiences is I think, in my opinion, one of the hardest parts of meditating. So, I mean, do you find, especially like, I'm sure you get benefits all across from different levels of experience meditating, right? From beginners to people who have been doing it for years. But like I said, at least I see for someone who's a novice like myself, real benefits of maybe trying out a chamber like that and getting that, kind of really nice experience.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. As a matter of fact, I had a young man come in today who was saying that he's been kind of getting into meditation and struggling with it. And so that was kind of his alert to this. And then on the other end of it, you have people who are experienced meditators who really dig it because they can kind of take their game to the next level. As if meditation wasn't hard enough mentally, you're dealing with the physical aspects of a sitting practice where gravity's fighting on you, aches and pains, your back, your legs cramping up. But in the tank, all that is removed. You know that you have the time and space for yourself where no one's trying to call you. It just removes all the obstacles, and it makes it that much easier to just enter the meditation space.
Yeah, the whole thing about it too is interesting for me, and as well. I'm sure that you know about this, but the actual history of it's crazy because realistically, I mean, we're coming up here. It's 2019, so it'll be 2020 soon. Float tanks were huge in like 1980, 1981. There was like a huge business for it, and then the whole AIDS epidemic took off, and like people had like this thing that if you got into a float tank that somebody was in before that, it like you could somehow contract AIDS, not knowing that like float tanks are actually some of the most sanitary things you can actually get into because of the salt and everything. But I just always found that so interesting that like it took that many years, for like the curse to wear off, because yeah, float tanks are still something that even now are still kind of like taboo.
Oh yeah, and not only the float tank industry, but I think the whole aquatic industry as a whole took a hit in the 80s when that was all
Right.
happening. Um, Fortunately, due to, I think now with social media and the internet in general, podcasts, I go back to Joe Rogan, the taboo is definitely dropping. And also, you mentioned with the cleanliness of the water in the tanks. I can honestly say that after all the research and what I've learned, that the float tank water is probably the cleanest public water that you're going to get into, which is frustrating because it kind of skeeves some people out, the whole idea of getting into water that someone was just in, yet they won't think twice about, jumping into a swimming pool that, people were just swimming in. People who are at home caring for their own pools really are probably not doing the due diligence with the proper procedure of keeping things clean. And I think a lot of times people are just building up excuses to not have the experience, because when it comes down to it, they're pretty afraid of just being alone, nothing, no phone, no people, and it can kind of freak some people out.
And you know what? I was laughing with Tom earlier when we were kind of getting set up. I was like, I gotta ask him because, like, I'll be honest. Like, when I was Tom sent me your website earlier in the week, and I was kind of looking through everything, and that was one of the things that kind of came through my head is like, man, I could kind of see myself like getting a little freaked out by the experience. Maybe even like a little claustrophobic. I was thinking, do you encounter that very often with your clientele?
Yeah, so we were just talking about the sanitation keeping people away, but the number one reason is definitely claustrophobia, which is also very frustrating because when you look at the psychological DSM handbook and what claustrophobia actually is and entails, less than 5% of the population is actually claustrophobic. And then you start talking about float tanks to people, and suddenly 75% of the population is claustrophobic. When people think of claustrophobia, obviously it's the small space, that is true. But the other piece to claustrophobia is really a lack of control in that space.
Mm-hmm.
So if you think of circumstances like an elevator, an airplane, or the famous MRI machine that freaks everyone out, if something goes wrong, if there's technical malfunction, the power, whatever, then you're stuck and there's nothing you can do. It's again out of your control, which is what is the claustrophobia. But in the tank, you're in complete control of the experience. You can get out whenever you want, And so it takes a lot of people coming in and recognizing this and seeing, and me showing them, and still even sometimes they're not down. But I can say is that some people who come in that are very scared of the claustrophobia factor, they come in and they do it. They garner the courage, they do it, and afterwards, like, they're fine. Not one time has someone like run out the front door in fear and
Right.
refuses to do it again. It's just the initial blockage, and once they get through, they feel good and safe, and they dig it.
Yeah, I was that's one of the things is like trying to overcoming that initial hurdle, like just getting over that fear and realizing, okay, this isn't so bad. It's like, what I'd compare it to is like, riding up to the first drop on a roller coaster.
I also believe that it's kind of like a roller coaster thing, because one of the other big things that I've heard as far as fear is that people actually have a fear of drowning in these. And it's funny because, well, it's not funny. Drowning's not funny, but you have a greater chance of drowning in your bathroom tub than you do of drowning in a tank, to be honest. And I mean, I don't know if you've ever like rolled over and got salt water in your eyes, but it hurts. and so like you're gonna wake up if you do fall asleep, and like it's actually good to fall asleep in these things. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's actually a common question. And I just tell people, no one's ever died in a float tank. People do fall asleep. I actually tell them if they die, it'd be a seamless transition and it would be quite a good way to go. and then I follow with, come on, man, like what kind of business model would that be? Like, tired of life, come on into go with the flow and just, end it all.
Yeah, it's hard to run a business when you're constantly killing off your clients, isn't it?
No, I'll just throw you in the back room with the rest of the bodies. We'll keep them with all the salt.
No, yeah, I've never, I think the thing is that people find excuses for things that are new.
It's irrational fear. It's not fear. It's irrational.
Well, one of the, and I don't know if you get a chance to listen to this one sometime. We did a podcast called Optimal Wellness with a guy who owns a cryo spa, basically. And even in Kansas, where Lawrence considers itself a progressive town, but it's kind of like mid-tier progressive, I guess. But
it's very progressive as far as the Midwest goes.
As far as the Midwest goes. But it's super hard to convince people to go do cryotherapy, man. Like it's incredible. And I imagine that float tanks here are probably about the same.
Yeah, I wonder about that because we're doing our thing up in the Northeast. Western Mass is real liberal, and it's still been tough. But I think, like, man, how are these places down in Tennessee and Georgia doing it?
Yeah. Texas is the spot, man. For some reason, like everybody, I lived in Texas, but I lived in El Paso, which is a different version. But East Texas is like becoming like the forefront for the fitness and nutrition and like alternative medicine. And it's like, how, what, like what, when did Texas start becoming such like a big move for this?
Well, Austin, right?
Austin, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, there's several float centers in Austin.
Yeah, the guy who owns the cryo spa here is from Dallas, and he's wanting to open. He's wanting to open like a float place here, and he's like, I don't even know if it's worth it, man. And I'm like, yeah, it's a weird business model, but I feel like it could be successful in the right environment.
Well, you know what? There's a lot helping it too, as far as like not even trying. Like it's in the media now. It's in the movies. It's in the a big thing helping is all the athletes doing it. So being up here in New England, I was on this train for a while, knowing because I'm just I'm in the business, but I've known for years that the Patriots have been using float tanks. Tom Brady has his own personal float tank in his home, and it kind of got leaked on their Super Bowl run this year through social media. One of the coaches making a tweet or something about how they've been using them. But I mean, the Seahawks, baseball team, Steph Curry is a huge floater. So it's only a matter of time, I believe. I think that what's happening is kind of how yoga blew up. The next thing that's happening is the mindfulness. And you have to realize at one point, yoga was the weird thing that all the hippies, the stretchy hippies were doing, And now it's like with this mindful thing, people are trying to move into meditation, but the Western culture in the States, it just struggles with that, the discipline, the patience, and the practice of a sitting practice. And that is where floating comes in, because it's really like a cheat code to get to these states that we were saying earlier, how all these other distractions, they're removed. And so I really think it's just inevitable. And it's not so much that it's floating that I believe in, it's the mindfulness meditation wave happening.
Yeah, and Tom and I, we kind of actually our very first episode was kind of about basically just mental health, and I know that I personally had an experience going kind of through a mental health crisis a few years ago, and that was one of the things that really helped me was just that meditation, that mind, just even just a few minutes of mindfulness meditation, can make such a huge impact. And if you're talking about carving out a specific chunk of your day to actually really commit to that, I mean that's just awesome, and the benefits of it are amazing.
Yeah. So are both of you guys veterans?
Yeah, we are.
Yeah. So like I mentioned, I go to these float conferences, right? And there's a strong veteran presence there. There's this one outfit that goes who's his name is Gary. I wish I knew the name of who he stands by.
Is it Gary
What's that?
from Forrest Gump?
Forrest Gump.
Oh, Gary Sinise?
Gary Sinise?
I don't know. He's an older gentleman.
I don't know.
I don't know. Gary Sinise is from he was Lieutenant Dan in Forrest Gump, but he's like this huge like veteran presence in like a lot of things. So I was curious if it was him.
Yeah, no, it's not anyone that is famous or anything, but basically because the floating is helping the veterans with their trauma. I think it's mainly a mental thing, but obviously, pretty much this whole time we've kind of been talking about mindfulness and how floating also relates to the mind, but really it's a physical thing too, where you're in there in this near gravity environment. Your spine is decompressing, your muscles relax. The salt, Epsom salt, is actually made up of magnesium and sulfate, and so the magnesium, they're doing the research with it now. Is it penetrating the skin and going into the body? And what they're finding is that could possibly a better avenue for the magnesium to enter the system anyway. It's kind of a big thing in the health world now, where there's all these magnesium creams instead of taking it in topically. So that's also a big benefit of the physical benefit of floating as well.
What's the longest you floated?
The longest I floated, I've done a couple 4-hour floats. I've done a 5-hour float. I got out about halfway in between the 5-hour and kind of rinsed off. It's nice because when I float, I have the luxury of not setting an alarm or anything. I just kind of get in there and I get out whenever I feel right. Sometimes it's an hour, sometimes it's 3 hours,
Do you do you feel like time changes while you're in there? Like, do you feel like it's a like I've heard that like some people go in for and because like a lot of people fall asleep doing it, and I've heard people like fall asleep and then like like just do like an hour and be like, oh, I feel like I slept 4 to 6 hours.
Yeah, so that was kind of part of the Patriots tweet there, where they said the coaches were using them to uh, for that very reason. That I think it kind of got twisted in that I forget what the exact tweet was, but basically they'd go in there for 45 minutes or whatever, and it was equal to like 4 hours of sleep.
Okay.
And that, I don't think that's necessarily true. What it is, it's replenishing certain like endorphins and dopamine levels that would be equivalent to that much sleep, not a whole system for the body of the sleep. Because put it this way, I've slept in the tank for 2.5 hours at a clip late at night, and then I get out and I get home and I go to bed. I'm not like good to go for the day. So I think it's more of a brain chemistry thing.
So it's not the secret to like being able to stay up for 22-hour days and
no.
that was a pipe dream anyway. So I'm a dumb country bumpkin. So like, let's say I walk into a place like yours for the first time. Can you kind of walk us through what's the experience like for a first time person, just kind of from start to finish? Like, can you describe that for us?
Yeah, so people come in, we have them, read a little waiver. It's basically kind of a preamble of what's to come. And then we have them use the restroom, and then I take them into the float room and give them the whole spiel. This is how you get in and out safely. You take your shower, pad your face dry, how to avoid getting the water in your eyes. And some people are pretty easy going. All right, yeah, all right, we're good. Other people are really nervous, and you kind of have to put some energy into that, making them feel comfortable. Other times, people really want to know, what's going to happen to me in there? What's going to happen in my mind, and this and that. And I go back to the do not program thing, where I will tell you how to be safe in there, and like I said, get in and out physically safe. But as far as what's going to happen in the mind, if I were to tell people like, oh, you're probably going to be nervous at first, and then you'll relax, and then you'll go through this state, and then this is going to happen, that's taking away the infinite amount of possibilities of what could happen in their mind. That was kind of the teachings of John Lilly, the inventor of the tank.
Outstanding. And that's kind of one of those things. Like, I think that I don't know what it is about our culture, but we're really kind of in some ways adverse to like just experiencing the moment, and like we want to know so much about everything before we go into it, instead of just kind of like kicking back and like enjoying it and taking it all in.
Yeah, no expectations is what I tell people.
Yeah, I think people are just so afraid of not having their phone on them for an hour that it's hard to like disconnect from that. It's weird, man. Like, I don't know. Jeff and I have talked a lot about how like the social media plays so much into the anxiety and stuff of people, including myself, and it's really interesting to me because I don't see I see this as something that could obviously blow up, and the the one thing is that I think as a society though we need to come together and admit that it's okay to not be okay. So many people have a hard time doing anything, either it's alternate medicine or medicine now, to admit that something's wrong with them. And so to say like, oh, okay, like, hey, this could maybe help me mentally or even physically, you would have to then admit that you needed that help. And I think that's a hard thing for people to do.
Yeah, so a lot of one of the main reasons people are coming to this is, like, I would say with anxiety. And so it's tricky because they're anxious, yet floating provokes anxiety. So
Right.
it's like a catch 22. And yeah, a lot of people coming in, they will not walk in and be like, hey, like, I'm really anxious about this and here's all my problems. And so which would be easier for me. I mean, I'm not a doctor or a psychologist, but yeah, at least we could work together, where, like you said, people kind of hide behind this curtain of like letting them know that something's wrong with them. I can say though that the first study done with floating, in actually your neighbors there in Oklahoma, they're doing the research at the Laureate Institute for Brain Research in Tulsa, is Dr. Justin Feinstein. The first data-driven experiment they did was dealing with people with anxiety. And I think it was about 50 patients they had come in, and they were just testing their levels. They hooked up all the brain scans and everything. And across the board, it was helping these people. And he said, you have to realize, though, like, they knew they were coming into this environment that was safe. There's professional psychologists there. It was like a professional setting. So going back to people coming into a public space who are not really going to be open about what's going on with them, it can provoke some anxiety, which is kind of like a catch-22 there.
Do you feel like that turns people away, or do you feel like people with anxiety kind of give it a second chance after that? Like, have you had any experience talking to people with anxiety about like who've either gone into there and be like, oh man, I was claustrophobic. Like, well, you weren't really claustrophobic, but maybe you had kind of an anxiety panic attack, but like we can work through this, or it does it seem to kind of help from the get go?
Yeah, so people will admit to being like really anxious in the beginning, and they're sometimes they're like, oh man, I was sitting in there thinking after 10 minutes I'm gonna have to get out and tell Steve I couldn't do it. And then they really just breathe through it, and they end up, it's an environment where your brain feels safe. Like, there's no fight or flight. You're good to relax, you're good to go. There can be some panic in the beginning, and sometimes I almost want to tell people like, hey, if you panic in the beginning, like, then do this. But like, that goes back to the programming, because I don't want to provoke panic if it's not even going to happen. But I think it would be helpful to almost tell people to just like, sit through the first uncomfortable few 10 minutes and go through it. But I think that goes back to why this is so powerful, is because people tend to do it anyway. I give the example of like meditation, where if you have a sitting practice and you're meditating, and the first 5 minutes or whatever, you're uncomfortable, your back hurts, there's a distraction, you just get up and walk away and you end it. But in the tank, there's so many factors where, even besides the environment, the fact that you carved out time to did this, you drove to the space, you paid the money, you committed to yourself that this is something you were going to do. Now you're in the tank, you're naked, you're laying in this water. To just like get up and end it all, you just like, all right, I guess I'll just tough it out. And then the people do, and then they're rewarded, and they get the peace comes.
Well, I would imagine that, at least for me, I feel like there's something very empowering too about, kind of, getting through that moment of anxiety, that moment of fear, whatever it is. So, I mean, that's kind of, I mean, in a way I could see that kind of almost being part of the experience. You know, hey, I encountered something difficult and I got through it and I was rewarded in the end for it. Do you get a lot? Do you get a lot of feedback like that from people or?
Yeah, man. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Nature loves courage. That's a quote I dig by my my good my good buddy Terrence McKenna. You guys know Terrence?
No.
I'm sorry. We're
Oh,
on
wait, Stoned Ape Theory?
Yeah. Stone
Yeah.
Ape Theory.
Yeah, bro.
Yes.
I don't know if you can see it or not, but I have the Stoned Ape Theory tattoo on my arm.
Oh yeah. So okay, you have a stoned ape. Have you guys ever floated?
No.
No, you have a stoned ape theory tattoo, and you've never been into floating.
Yep, swear.
Why? So why not? Let's talk about this.
Hey, so dead serious, and Jeff can attest to this. I'm not bullshitting you at all. I was in Alaska from 12 to 15 with Corey, right? So yeah. I had seen cryotherapy before in El Paso when I left, right? So I get up to Alaska where there's nothing. There's nothing like this whatsoever. So there's no cryotherapy. There's no floating, 12 to 15. I got down here and I was telling Jeff for like months, man, like I need to find, cryotherapy place. I need to find this. And we're going to do it. So come to find out there's like one here. And then now, about floating, I'm like, okay, well now I have to hop in the float tank now. So it's one of those things where not that I'm in no way, shape or form like afraid to do it. I just need to go do it. Yeah. For me, it's not fearful for me at all. I want to do it.
It's just one of those things I've never really, I just made the time to do it. I'm totally down to give it a shot. So I think it sounds like a pretty, like I said, I wish I did it more, but I'm definitely all about the mindfulness and the meditating. And, I do it. You can ask Tom, like, him and I go to school together, and there will be days where I'm in the library and I will just like check out for like 15 minutes and I'll come back to, and my mood will be different. I'll be like, I can tell that was good for you.
Yeah. Jeff and I both said that we were going to speak to you first and then do floating afterwards. But we've been looking up. We actually literally found, Corey actually found me a place in Kansas City. And then I found out that a place here in Lawrence actually does it too, but it was kind of like what you were saying earlier. It's not like an actual devoted float. It's like acupuncture, massage, like all that, and then they have a float tank in it. So I think that we're going to end up doing the one in Kansas City that's actually just a float tank only kind of place.
Okay, yeah. So how far is that from you?
Like 25, 30 minutes.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah, we go to Kansas City quite often, so it's not far from us at all. We're actually I don't know. We're definitely not in Kansas City metro area, but the neighborhoods that are not far from here.
That's the thing about being in Kansas, everything's a lot more spread out, but because Kansas City, probably 30 miles to Kansas City. But we don't have the congestion and everything y'all have. We get around pretty quick out here. So
you wouldn't think twice about driving 30 minutes.
Oh, no.
Oh, God, no. It takes us 30 minutes. And there'll be a guy listening to this named Bill who the cryo spa, right? It's 2.3 miles from here, but it's considered the west side of town. And it takes 20 minutes to get there. And he makes fun of us when he comes into town because he's like, you guys won't even drive over there. And we're like, dude, it takes 20 minutes to get there. But we're just joking with him, because we go over there all the time. And he's like, well, if you lived in Dallas, you'd hate it. And I'm like, yeah, probably so. Well, that's why we don't live in Dallas.
The truth of the matter is Lawrence is hard to get around in. It literally, you can almost drive to Kansas City in the time, if you catch it in the wrong time of day, it takes you to get to the other side of Lawrence. So it's just kind of one of those things. But nah, man, Kansas City, we go there basically whenever we want. So we'll definitely check it out.
We're gonna do it for sure. I have to ask you though, what you think about the stoned ape theory.
I think it's a possibility.
Yeah, I definitely think it's a possibility.
I have a Terrence book on the coffee table, just mainly for conversation. I love it, a conversation piece. And just talking about Terrence and his ideas is all. That's that's the best thing about working in a float center, or loosely working using the term working, because I don't really feel like that. But people come out of their float, and no matter what their background, age, whatever is, it's not 2 minutes before we're talking about the stoned ape theory or consciousness or is God real. There's really not much small talk that goes on in the float center. It's a cool thing.
Well, no, and then his brother's actually like considered, I mean, I guess he's the scientist of the two, and
Yeah,
it's funny because if you look at Terrence's earlier work, his brother actually like supported a lot of that work. So it's like it's funny to me that I think that it has a very very real possibility of being somewhat true, and it it's almost laughable, I think, but it's a society based thing that we're in now, that people don't even acknowledge that it could be true.
yeah. Well, there's, it's cool because like there's this whole psychedelic renaissance happening, and people want to talk about going back to the 60s and how that was the time for it all. And yeah, I think it was, and it really, got these substances on the map. But the thing is, the research has been suppressed for so long that now in, 2019, we're finally doing the science. Even with cannabis, it's 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 going to be, I feel like everyone's going to be, using doing at least the CBDs, as a medicinal thing. It's just they've repressed the research for so long, probably the pharmaceuticals, the government. But now you look at organizations like MAPS. Are you familiar with the Rick Doblin and what they're doing with MAPS?
No, go ahead. We're not.
Enlighten us.
Yeah. So that's the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, and this will interest you guys as veterans, because the work they're doing is dealing with veterans, and they're using MDMA and psilocybin to treat veterans for PTSD.
Yeah.
Psilocybin, I think, is more geared towards depression and like end of life terminal illnesses, but the MDMA, they're finding that within three uses of it's clinical settings, there's therapists, and there's a lot they do working with the veterans before, and they have sessions without the substances before, but they're using the substances in three different sessions, and the cure rate is like upwards of like 70%, which is unheard of for instance. I think in order for a pharmaceutical to pass, it really just the placebo has to be over 50%. So if it's helping 50%, 51% of people, boom, slap it in an Advil bottle and sell it to the masses. So this is huge stuff. And not only is it helping and curing these veterans, there's no ongoing treatment of substances. It's just the therapy. So where's the money in that? I think that's where all the fear is. And they're just using the PTSD to get their foot in the door with the government, because it's like, how is the government going to fire back and say, oh, we don't want to help our veterans? Really, this is going to be helping all sorts of people. They're saying that these substances are going to be like to psychotherapy what the microscope was to science. Like, how did we go on? How did we not have these,
Well, and I actually lied to you because I do know what MAPS is, because I probably donated $400 to it through Onnit.
Awesome.
Yeah, because that's when you check out on the Onnit. Yeah. That's who you can donate money to at the end.
Okay.
Yeah, and no, I agree. I think the thing is that where pharmaceuticals have controlled the market for so long, that if let's say it went in a different route, and psilocybin and all that was used 20-30 years ago but was controlled by the pharmacy, it would be much popular today. It wouldn't be a schedule, whatever, was it, schedule 2, schedule 3, whatever it is, drug in places that, and we all clearly know that that's not what it is, and it's the whole war on drugs in the 90s really it started as a young thing, because you remember Dare, the
yeah.
And then like the 90s commercials where you're smoking a joint, and then your dog starts talking to you and you melt into the couch, and then your friends hate you, like just weird stuff. It's when you start showing commercials like that to developing brains, then those same people, when they're 30-40 years old, they're the same people that look at you and go like, what do you mean you want to try this? That's drugs. And you're like, no, it's really not, because like you're over here popping Oxycontins 5 times a day. Like it's become a thing where the government has almost brainwashed people into believing that it's okay to pop pills because they're prescribed by a doctor, but doing a natural way, that's crazy, and that makes zero sense to me whatsoever.
Well, it makes sense to me because with the pills they can make a ton of money. These other things they can't. So to me, that's what I mean. I don't know. I'm sure there's people who know a lot more about this than me, but that's what it breaks down to me. It's always about the money. But you mentioned earlier about like the taboo of floating, and I think there's a taboo involved with these substances too. And I really don't even like calling them drugs because they're and using the word recreational with cannabis too. I don't like that term either, but that's kind of what they're doing with all of this. Michael Pollan, are you guys familiar with the author Michael Pollan? He wrote The Omnivore's Dilemma. He wrote Botany of Desire. He's like really big in the Whole Foods movement. He is like a New York Times bestselling author, and he just came out with the book How to Change Your Mind. Are you aware of that book?
Yes.
And what's great about that is like, whoa, like, this is not what's Michael Pollan doing writing a book like this? It's not some like Dennis McKenna's fourth book on this. Oh well, forget Dennis McKenna. Like he's to the norms or the people who are more conservative. He's just another crazy drug guy, but Michael's got some clout, and I think the name of the title of the book is perfect too. How to Change Your Mind. People who are a little more conservative, I point them in the direction to that book and see if Michael really can or can't change your mind about these substances and lifting the taboo.
Well, right, and that's the thing too is that Joe Rogan has a huge following, but I believe that he's still looked at by the older generation, the older conservative generation, as like, well, this guy has sleeve tattoos. He commentaries for MMA fights. He smokes pot on his show. Like, we're not going to believe anything he says. Like, it doesn't matter who he brings on. And he does. He brings on some of the most intelligent people in the world. And I was telling Jeff about this, and maybe you can. I'm hoping that you know more about this than me, because Jeff and I were talking about this the other day, and he's like, I got to hear this, and I haven't gone back and found the episode. But there was a psychiatrist that Joe brought on probably a year ago, half a year ago, and he had done like a trip around Europe and was going basically to where they were like shooting heroin in like clinics, like clinics, and it was like medicine. Like they weren't doing it for like to get high. They would like go in the morning before work, shoot like a small dose. Before they went home for the day, would shoot a small dose. Like, have you ever heard of this at all, or know anything I'm talking about?
Yeah, I do. I think there's several countries doing this. I think Portugal was one of the first ones to, but so and people point that out in conversation, and my issue with that is like, the United States has over 300 million people. We can't just adopt these policies of like these smaller nations that are, have the population of Massachusetts alone. It's a little more complicated than that. I do basically, yeah, they're like these clinics where people can go to, get clean stuff, and then it's like a rehab, and they're helping them rather than just like throwing them in jail. So I think that's, that might be the future and leading the way. But again, it's something that I don't know if they would do that state by state or how they're going to go about doing it. But I think these people who have addictions, to just like throw them in jail is not the most healthy, productive, or financially stable cost for anyone.
No, yeah, I'm trying to get Jeff to go on an ayahuasca trip with me.
Oh, yeah.
And well, he doesn't want to go, but he told me the other day he'd go. But Jeff, he was, I don't know. I really want to do this. One, I'm just all about, my thing is I don't look at it like you were saying earlier as a drug. You know what I'm saying? Like, I looked at it like these are things that people have been doing for thousands and thousands of years, and I just want to try it. And if it gives me just 2% chance of being a better person, why would I not do it? And that's kind of how I view those things. And I know that everyone doesn't see it like that. When you talk to other people about it, they're like, oh yeah, you're just going to the Amazon to do a drug trip. It's like, no, it's not what I'm doing, but all right.
Have you ever done any?
Nope.
No.
Nope.
So, yeah. See, my thing with ayahuasca, I've never done ayahuasca. The thing with ayahuasca is like, yeah, to do it properly, I believe you would have to go to the Amazon and like, because now there's this thing in the States, and like you go to LA, for instance, and every other person you meet is a shaman.
Yes.
It's like, and it can be dangerous, man. You don't know what you're getting. You know what these people's intentions are. My whole thing with the way I use psychedelics is very intentional, and it's typically mushrooms. And I'm sure you know a good deal about psilocybin if you're into Terrence and how he talks about them. And to me, it's like when I'm doing these things, the last thing I want to do is be sitting in a circle of 20 other people who, in ayahuasca, someone's purging to the right, someone's screaming to the left, and I'm trying to like, connect with God or whatever. But I believe in the like Terrence talks about the being alone in the silent darkness, and just going that way. I don't want to perturb you or
No, you
one way
won't.
or another. Yeah. No, and I think people who do that, it's great. But I just think that the way I've experienced the getting control of the mushroom and just having that, it's just between you and the mushroom. Van Morrison has this song. It's like, and I'm stealing this quote from Terrence. He puts it in a talk where it's called "The Garden," I believe, and one of the lyrics is no teacher, no guru, just you in the garden. Basically, it removes all the obstacles of man and just puts you in contact with the other. And again, with the shamans and this and that, there's so many variables involved in finding the right person. But it's not something to take lightly and something I would say just run into. But Terrence will definitely lead you in the right direction.
Do you feel like that's why you like the float tank so much?
Let's just say if it wasn't for my experience with the mushrooms, we probably wouldn't be sitting here talking right now about how I am operating a float center. I have not used mushrooms in the tank.
That was my next question. That was literally my next question. I was like, well, we'll see.
Well, there's a chance you turn into a pro hominid ape if you do that. So I'm not really. Have you guys seen the movie Altered States?
No. So okay. So I was going to ask you about that. I actually, that was something else that I meant to bring up. Wasn't that like a huge bash against the float tanks, right? Or am I?
No. No, it was loosely based on the life of John Lilly, and it was actually a great movie until the end. It gets weird, and like he goes down into the Amazon or some jungle, and I don't know if he synthesizes, like he comes back and he synthesizes ayahuasca or something. Right. He's experimenting with that before the tank, and then he like turns into a caveman, and it kind of like gets weird. But honestly, especially a lot of people in older generations who know about floating, they're like, oh, like that movie Altered States. So I think it was great just for getting the word out.
Okay.
Sounds like we're gonna have to
binge watch Altered States.
Yeah. Get ourselves educated here.
All right, so we're coming up on 15 minutes left. We're going to switch gears because we talked. So prior to the podcast, when we were coming on the air, Stephen was telling us he's got Bob Dylan and Gandalf in the background.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So what's up with the Bob Dylan? What's up with the Gandalf? Let's hear it.
Yeah, so I'm sitting in my office right now at the Float Center, and I got Bob Dylan and Gandalf hanging behind me. My mom actually is the artist of each, and I wish you guys could see better what a great job she did. But when she was younger, she was all about the Lord of the Rings, and that picture she drew when she was about 15, it was hanging in my grandma's house forever. And the Bob Dylan she gifted to my father that she drew when she was in college, because my dad's a big Bobby D fan. And recently, having gotten into the Lord of the Rings, one of my best friends I met at school, it's his all-time fave, and I'm like, all right, I'm gonna check out this Lord of the Rings thing. And so I read the trilogy and now adorn the office with Gandalf.
That is super cool, though. That, I mean, not only do you have that connection with actual like story itself, but also, it's your mom's artist. That's amazing. Like, so is Gandalf your favorite character from Lord of the Rings? We're gonna get down and dirty and nerdy.
No doubt.
No doubt. Okay.
I
No
dig that.
doubt.
I dig that. Tom, who's your?
Man, I don't know if it's Gandalf. I like Gandalf, and now I'm trying to think because we do this all the time too. When we were no, we do we have literally gone to bars before in the middle of the day. We won't call bars and grills. We're not alcoholics, but but we'll go and we'll sit and we were like during the Game of Thrones thing. We were sitting and Jeff and I had both read the books a long time ago, and we would sit and like talk about like, man, this was. Wait, was this in the book or was this in the show? Like
The bartenders that make fun
and
of
the bartenders
us.
would make fun of us and stuff, and
Yeah.
we'd be like, yeah, whatever. No, I mean, I still think Bilbo is probably my favorite all-time character. I know it's not a Lord of the Rings reference, but I mean, as far as Tolkien in general, I would say
Yeah.
Bilbo.
I dig that.
Yeah.
Aragorn's my man, though.
Aragorn's tight.
Aragorn's my man. So, and then I mean, it's just like what an iconic duo back there, like Gandalf and Bob Dylan. Like, I mean, I bet there might not be another office in the world that has those two memorialized there. Right behind the headman's desk. That's awesome.
Yeah, I guess I never thought of that. They're my spiritual guides. They're my business mentors. I'm trying to think of the name of this podcast that I got into when I was reading it. It was a podcast about the Lord of the Rings, and like you want to talk about guys geeking out on the Lord of the Rings, man. They're like these like 40-year-old guys that would get together and like give summaries, and like I was like, oh man, like you think you guys are into the Lord of the Rings?
Yeah.
Oh no, I have to. It's funny because I have to stay away from that because I'll go down the rabbit hole some nights on things, and if you actually get into the whole Tolkien lore and look at like how he connected it to religion and how Sauron, could have been Lucifer falling. It gets wild. And then going back into the generations of Middle Earth, or when he was part of like basically the orchestra up in the sky before Middle Earth was a thing. The whole history is amazing to me, and I could read that stuff for 4 or 5 hours and then be like,
Yeah, and Tom will definitely chase it down the rabbit hole. There's no doubt about that.
yeah.
Yes, that's my buddy. I guess I never really got that far into it. But Tolkien will say that like, it's not all, because then there's ties into Christianity, and he's
Yeah.
like, no, you're looking too far deep into it. It's kind of like the whole like Pink Floyd and Wizard of Oz thing, and Roger Waters is just like, absolutely not. You people are just. It's too much.
People
The
see
Paul McCartney is dead. It's like people see what they want to see.
exactly.
Yeah, Jeff, when we were watching Game of Thrones, Jeff has this guy that he was watching on YouTube, and that's kind of where we were like, yeah, we're really into Game of Thrones, we like it, and then you watch like an episode of this guy on YouTube, and you're like, yeah, never mind, we're kind of like, we like it, this guy's life is this, like that's what he does.
Yeah, if for any of our listeners that are into Game of Thrones, go check out Preston Jacobs on YouTube. The dude's wild.
He absolutely, he breaks down like so many different things, but there's a ton of like Lord of the Rings stuff that's like that too, and I think that people do get just too far into it, but it changed a lot of people's lives, and that's what I was trying to tell Scott. That's one of the first series that it got me into actually my favorite series, which is Robert Jordan Eye of the World series, and if you've never checked that out, that's actually it's it's really, really good.
God, what is it, 14 books or
14
something?
or 15 books, but on not only that, he passes away before he gets a chance to finish it, and then Jeff's favorite writer finishes the books.
Well, I don't know that he's my favorite writer,
fantasy writer.
No, Brandon Sanderson is the author that finished Robert Jordan's series, and he's significant to me because when I was kind of going through my depression a couple of years ago, one of the things that my therapist told me is like, you need to re-engage with some of your old hobbies, and one of my old hobbies was reading, and that was the first series I read. I had the first book. My brother bought it for me for Christmas like a year before, basically, and I started reading that, and it was like one of those things that like I mean literally I remember I was sitting there reading it one night, and it was almost like a switch flipped in my brain, and I had goosebumps on my skin just reading this book, and I was like really emotional, and it was just like it was one of like it was an experience I'll never forget as long as I live. And it was a really important experience in my life. And so I think just the fact that I'm connected to that, through that book series, like it means a lot to me personally. So it was a weird one. So
I mean, I just kind of like Lord. So I'm looking up right now. Lord of the Rings it's the I think it's the best selling book of all time, other than the Bible, right?
I believe that.
I would believe that. I don't know that for sure.
I used to tell people, it's funny you actually say that, and I mean, Jordan could attest to this. I actually may have told you this before, but back when I would talk to people, I would tell people is that you could take if you had an alien individual that knew nothing of our land, and you gave them a copy of the Bible and you gave them a copy of the Lord of the Rings and asked them which one they thought was like our way that we lived life, they would pick Lord of the Rings 100 times out of 100.
There's probably a lot of truth to that, actually.
I just always thought that when I was growing up, that's kind of how I felt about it. Like, there's a cult following for it, and I do believe that it's an important piece of literature. And that's what I was going to say earlier. That's what I was going to say. There was like a guy on Facebook that he put a status up, and it said, unpopular opinion, Lord of the Rings is not a good science fiction book, basically, or fantasy
novel. Go fist fight him right now.
Yeah. And he had actually, you can go ahead and take over and talk real quick. I'm going to pull this up and actually read the comment section on it.
Well, it's the second best science fiction book of all time.
What do you think the first is?
The Bible.
That's fair. No, I'm okay with that.
Hey, easy guys. My mom listens to this podcast.
No, I'm okay with that. No, I really am. I'm okay with that. I do believe that the Bible has good things in it that people can guide and live their life for, but to think that it's real is kind of, I don't know, it's kind of far-fetched to me.
Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, right?
Absolutely. No, that's one of the things I'm actually really fascinated with, is like the idea of the Jeffersonian Bible. How are you familiar with that at all?
Yeah. He pulled out like what wasn't real and this and that.
He basically took the New Testament and he pulled out everything that isn't basically supernatural, but basically the idea is that the wisdom that is passed through the New Testament is all still there and intact. And it's really a fascinating experience, actually. I grew up in a really religious household, so it was a really interesting experience for me going through and seeing it from that perspective and experiencing that. Because you're absolutely right, Tom. There is a lot of good things we can take from there. It's just how literally people apply things to their lives sometimes.
Well, and it's not that it's hard. Being a human being is hard, and that's what people don't give enough credit for. And so the one problem with the living your life by the Bible is that there are very few, if any, that actually do that. And so to say that I take this book and this is how I live my life and this is what I base everything on, it's a tad hypocritical. And I think that just using that as a guide is completely fine, like you should do with any literature. But there's no book in the world I'm taking and I'm saying, this is exactly how I'm going to live my life every second of the day. And if I don't, basically it's a sin, whatnot. Right. But you know how much pressure that puts on a human being? Like, you know how hard it is to be a human and then to be mistake free. It's not possible. And so that's my only problem with it, is that,
hey, Jesus did it.
You hear that a lot around here.
You know what I find interesting is that most Christians of whatever denomination have never even read the Bible. So it's like, how can you consider, you do know that religion is based off of the book so I don't know.
No, I agree. For me, I don't even think it just falls into Christianity. I think that it's all just aspects of the world we live in now. Everyone has become a guru of some sort, without any of the accreditation. And I'm not talking about like university education accreditation, but actually putting in the time and research to know what you're talking about. Everyone, it has become, that they take and they grasp onto something whether they know if it's the truth or not. And
it's like the LA shamans, right?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Well, and when you were mentioning that earlier, I meant to tell you is that like even in Peru, they have these Spanish shamans now that they like they're like basically like gypsy shamans that like try to lure people into like doing their type of ayahuasca that's not even real. So like you have to actually, even now when you go to Peru, it's become such a big thing because of Aubrey Marcus and all these guys that, you know, even down there, they're starting to take advantage
It's an industry.
of it. I think this dude definitely deleted this Lord of the Rings post.
Oh, well, he probably got a lot of backlash for that. I'm not going to lie.
So I have a question for you, Tom. So, you know, you mentioned like trying to get into ayahuasca. And so, but, you know, you got the stoned ape theory tattoo on your shoulder. Like, and I brought it up before, like, have you not considered doing a mushroom trip?
Oh, no, I've done mushroom trip. Yeah. No, I've just never done ayahuasca before.
Okay.
Yeah, my bad. I didn't know. No. I've never done any hard LSD and I've never done any ayahuasca. And the big thing with ayahuasca is I just wanted to, experience not just a psychedelic trip, but the one thing that I've heard that I think that would be very cool, and it would be, I get what you're saying about the group setting kind of thing, but the one thing that I think would be cool is to be in a psychedelic state while hearing the shaman do like a chant and dance. I've heard that there's some kind of like subconscious soothing to connecting you to the earth, like as you hear them like sing and dance. And I want to experience that. The one thing I don't want to experience is throwing up and shitting on myself. That's the one thing I don't want to experience.
Icaros is the chanting they do.
Yeah, see.
But again, it's so dependent on the practice. So that's what I love about floating, right? Where like when you float, you know, it's you in the tank. You know, you look at like whatever, everyone's a Reiki master now and massage and whatever, which I think is all great. But, you know, there's a lot of charlatans out there. So you can't just, you know, you go to the bad practitioner and you write off the whatever the practice is. If you find someone good, that's great, but you just got to make sure you're
got to do your homework.
No, we actually, if you get a chance to listen to the Rose, it's with a Reiki apprentice. Actually, I don't think that. I mean, he's been going for a while, but he actually is still under somebody as well too. But Andy, like you'll absolutely love that episode.
It was a cool episode. Like Andy he goes off. Like it was cool.
Andy's one of those people that when you meet him, you kind of you're drawn to him. Like we literally let him go, and it was unique to say the least.
Absolutely.
I just told him the other day, I went in for a massage the other day and told him, I was like, yeah, we talked about you on the last podcast, and basically we were trying to figure out where he's from, but he's from Kansas, and a guy that came on the podcast knew him, and I was like, dude, Andy's from another planet. Like he's not from Kansas.
Yeah, no, I hear that.
Jeff was a huge fan of him though.
Yeah, Andy was I didn't really know what to expect with Andy, but it was a really like awesome surprise. Just like the thing that was really cool about our time with Andy was like Andy definitely speaks a different language than I do, but like just like the universal truths that he tells, like it's funny because he puts things that I inherently know in a way that I would never think to put them. And that was just really a really cool experience, having somebody from such a different perspective come in, and it was cool. It was a lot of fun. Like he's a very, very interesting, very wise gentleman, I would have to say.
Yeah. But Andy's also one of those people that like it to the normal person. Like if you sat and talked to Andy, you would know that he's not full of shit. But if you like read his story somewhere, like if he wrote it down, you'd be like, this dude's crazy. This guy's absolutely insane, but he's not. And you can tell, like, even when you're sitting across from him, you can tell, even if for some reason he was completely full of shit, he believes in everything he's saying. So it's like, you trust him just on the fact that he believes what he's saying.
Yeah.
And, but he gets into basically when he found out he was a healer, that he thinks that he's lived thousands of generations. And he goes into like, he was having these crazy dreams, and then you just got to listen to the episode, but it's absolutely phenomenal. And he's never had a psychedelic experience, but he did it. he did an apprenticeship where he went out and for like, what was it, 2-3 days?
Yeah, I don't remember for sure how long it was.
They went out and they just talked to plants.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's Jeff and I both were like, there's no way we could do that. We just don't have that mindset.
I got some learning to do.
With the ayahuasca. So when the the white man made its way down and first was discovered the tribes doing ayahuasca, and they had to figure like, so the ayahuasca brew was this root and this vine, and you mix it and you boil it, and there's like thousands of different plants and roots and vines in the jungle. How did they know to take this one and that one and do this and that? And so that's what the the white man was asking them, and the indigenous people were just like, oh, the plants told us, like, just like that.
Yeah. See, that's definitely Andy.
Yeah.
And well, Andy was honestly a big push for the Peru trip too, because this is what he told me. He was like, hey, like, with because we got on the topic of kids putting DMT in these vape pens and smoking DMT out of vape pens now, and have you heard about this?
I think I have.
Okay.
I didn't know it was actually real.
Oh yeah, it's real. Yeah, they're altering these vape pens and putting DMT in it and smoking it. Yeah, we know. Jeff and I both. That's exactly the same.
Strap up, kids.
Yeah. Well, yeah, there's some weird stuff going on in the kid kingdom now. Jordan was telling me some stuff the other day. We won't go into that, but it's some weird
stuff. Where can I get one of these pens?
Yeah, exactly. Well, you got to alter it yourself. You got to get a hold of DMT. That's the thing. You can get the vape pens anywhere. They're like altering themselves. These kids are little geniuses. They watch too much Dexter's Laboratory, man. Now they're just getting after it. But Andy was the one that told me, go to Peru, because you need to do the plant in its home. That way you don't disrespect the plant.
Yes.
And and that sounds crazy to people, but when he said it, I was like,
that makes sense.
That makes a ton of sense, dude. I was like, you know what? That makes a ton of sense. And he was like, yeah. I was
just listening to a Duncan Trussell podcast today. Y'all know Duncan?
Mm-hmm.
So it just came out today, and he was interviewing someone, and she said that very same thing you just said.
Really? Yeah. Andy said that. Yeah. Andy's so interesting. And the thing about Andy is that the reason I think I trust him more than anything is just because of how truthful I thought he was. But we get done with the podcast. We turned it off. We're packing up. He goes, this is all he says. He goes, man, I didn't even get to talk about my woodworking. And I was like, whoa. Dude. And me and Jeff didn't say anything the whole podcast, because we were just like,
we were letting him run with it, like, because he was going.
And I didn't even, like, you'll listen to the episode. It's just Andy talking. Like, we say a few things here and there, but like, we were just like not mouths dropped, but we were just like in awe, because we didn't know what to say. Like, he talks about like climbing up into the moon and sitting with a red and green beast, and we're like,
right on, man. Right on.
Yeah. We're like, this sounds great, dude. And then, but you meet him, man. He's such a down to earth, really, really nice guy. And it's like, holy shit.
How did you get connected with him?
He's my massage therapist.
Oh, whoa.
Yeah. And I don't know. And what's funny? Dead serious. We do this for every podcast almost. You never know when you're going to invite someone on that could be like a dud. You just don't. You don't know. There's some people in life you just don't connect with. Jeff, we almost forgot about the podcast that day. Jeff was like in the library all day studying.
I had a test the next day.
He had a test the next day, maybe. Either way, we were kind of just like, whatever, we got to get this over with, let's do it. And Andy's one of those dudes, when you first meet him, he doesn't come across as a dud, but he's a very like stoic. He smiles. He's very nice, but
kind of quiet, honestly.
And Jeff goes, so yeah, man, tell us how you get started. And he laughs out loud and goes, well, it's kind of a bit of a story. And that was it. Just went crazy. And we were like, and we just both for like the whole next day were like, dude, we didn't expect that.
No. And it was one of those things too. Like, it was really funny for me because I walked in there like, and I didn't want to be there like that. I did not want to be there that day. I had a bunch of stuff going on, and like Tom said, we'd forgot about it. And after sitting there with Andy for an hour, I was just like, I felt at peace, like listening. I got educated that day, straight up. So it was a good experience.
Yeah.
But
it did.
I hope I passed the test, guys.
No, you did.
You did. I was a little quiet. I got an education today on some stuff I didn't know about, so that's good. And
you know, that's Jeff and I's big thing too, is that like we wanted to bring on these whole niche podcasts. They're cool and all, and it is cool to have those and have, you know, those things. But the thing is too is that for us, we really believe that the whole reason to have a podcast is to learn things, you know. And dude, I'm telling you, you're going to be episode 10, and the amount of shit that we've learned,
it's really funny because like we will start these podcasts and we'll kind of have an idea of sort of what's going to be, you know, go on. And like, we knew we were going to talk about your float tank a little bit, but like, I mean, I had no idea that literally, I mean, you guys were talking about all sorts of stuff that I literally couldn't even comment on, but I was just like, yeah, like I said, you never know where it's going to go. And that's kind of part of the fun is you see the conversations go a lot of different directions. You learn a lot of different things. So,
yeah, I dig it. It's almost like you guys benefit in the fact that like if two dudes from Kansas called me one day and were like, hey, we want to know all about floating and what you do. Can you talk to us for 2 hours? I'd be like, absolutely not. Like,
yeah,
I don't have time for that. But because it's like, oh, you're a podcast, it's like you get to reach out and learn from people who probably normally you wouldn't otherwise.
No, exactly. And the benefits of the business both get, I mean, we both get air media time. It's cool, man. We've really enjoyed it, and we really appreciate you coming on, man.
Yeah. So would you like to go ahead and just give your business a plug? Maybe give your website, your Instagram, those sorts of things.
You know what? Not even, man, because I know you guys are mainly pulling from Kansas. I just want to give floating in general a plug. Like wherever you are in this world, in this country, go type in float center near me, get in a float tank. If you're hesitant, re-listen to this podcast. I think we touched all the bases on like fears and how to work through them and blockages. And yeah, we'll just end it with the nature loves courage float. He ends that quote with saying, you'll see that it loves courage by being rewarded and finding it's a cloud of pillows or something like that. He says, you know, there's so much fear involved, but you can act from a place of fear or love. And so just get into love, man.
I feel that.
I absolutely love that. Nature loves courage. I'm totally stealing that. So
yeah, check out the a YouTube clip on just type in Nature Loves Courage, Terrence McKenna. They steal it from a longer talk. It's about 2 minutes long. They put a little music. People who don't know Terrence, I point them in that direction and just blow their mind.
Awesome. I'll definitely check it out. Well, we appreciate you so much for coming on with us tonight. It's been a really interesting ride for the last hour.
I'll come to Massachusetts.
Right, you're welcome. I duly noted it. You guys are awesome. Thanks for having me.
I'll come to Massachusetts and we can smoke a blunt sometime.
Oh, yeah, and then we'll get floaty, man, all day.
Have a good one, dude.
Have a good night. Thanks.
All right. Peace, guys.
Peace. And then everybody out there, man, hey, thank you so much for listening to us. You know, remember to check out our Instagram and our Facebook. And good night.
Good night, nerds.